I had just poured my second cup of coffee when the pharmacist looked at me the way you look at someone standing too close to the edge of something dangerous. I did not know it then. I was 63 years old, retired after 31 years as a civil engineer, and I had been feeling wrong for almost 4 months. Not dramatically wrong. Not the kind of wrong that makes you call an ambulance or wake your children in the middle of the night. Just a quiet, persistent wrongness that settled into my bones the way cold settles into an old house. Gradually, completely, until you cannot remember what warmth felt like. My name is not important. What matters is this. I was a healthy man. I walked 3 miles every morning along the creek trail behind my house in Asheville, North Carolina. I cooked my own meals. I paid my bills on time. I had retired with enough in savings that I did not need to worry, and I owned my house outright. A 4-bedroom colonial that my wife Margaret and I had bought in 1987 and paid off together before she passed from a heart condition 8 years ago. I had mourned her properly. I had learned, slowly and painfully, to live alone. I had found a rhythm. And then my son came home. My son, I will call him Daniel, was 34 years old and had spent the better part of a decade making decisions that did not work out. A restaurant partnership in Atlanta that collapsed. A real estate venture in Phoenix that cost him more than he put in. A marriage that ended after 2 years when his wife, a kind woman named Priya, told my daughter that she felt like she was living with someone who was always waiting for something better to come along. Daniel had charm and intelligence and a smile that made people trust him before they had any real reason to. He had gotten those things from somewhere. I was never sure where. He called me in late September and said he needed a fresh start. He said Asheville would be good for him. He said he wanted to be close to family. I said yes, because he was my son, and because I believed that people could change, and because, if I am being honest with myself, the house felt very large for one person and had for a long time. He moved in on a Saturday in October. He brought 2 suitcases and a laptop bag and a bottle of bourbon that he placed on my kitchen counter like a housewarming gift to himself. He seemed lighter than I remembered. Happy almost. I told myself that was a good sign. The glasses arrived 3 weeks later. He came home one evening with a flat, rectangular box and set it on the dinner table between our plates. He said he had been thinking about how much I squinted at my phone and at the television, and he had ordered me a pair of blue light blocking glasses from some company he had read about online. He said the lenses were supposed to help with eye strain and improve sleep. He said he had read studies about it. He made a small presentation of taking them out of the box. They were simple, wire-framed, not unattractive, and he asked me to try them on right there at the table. I tried them on. He smiled. He said they looked good on me. I wore them that evening while I read. They did not bother me. They did not feel different from any other glasses. I thanked him and forgot about them. I started feeling wrong about 2 weeks later. The first symptom was fatigue, a heaviness that did not respond to sleep. I could rest for 9 hours and wake up feeling like I had spent the night carrying something. Then came a dull ache in my joints that moved around. My knees one day, my wrists the next, my shoulders the day after that. My appetite dropped. Food started tasting flat, like everything had been rinsed of flavor. I told my doctor at my November appointment that I was tired and achy. She ordered blood work. The results came back, and she called to say that everything looked essentially normal for a man my age, that my iron was slightly low, that I should try to get more rest and take a daily vitamin. I did those things. I did not get better. Daniel was attentive during this period, noticeably attentive, though I did not notice the noticeability until much later. He offered to cook dinner several nights a week. He asked about my symptoms with what seemed like genuine concern. He suggested I see a specialist. He drove me to 2 additional appointments and sat in the waiting room with his laptop and his coffee, patient and present in a way he had never quite managed to be when he was younger. He also, I came to remember, asked me almost every day whether I was still wearing the glasses, not in an obvious way. He would work it in naturally. He would sit down across from me in the evening and say something like, "Did those glasses help at all today? Did your eyes feel less tired?" Or he would notice them on the coffee table and say, "You should keep those on while you're reading, Dad. That's the whole point." He was never insistent. He was never strange about it. He just kept returning to the subject, gently and persistently, the way water returns to a low point. I thought he was being a caring son. I wanted to think that. It had been a long time since he had been a caring son, and I was not ready to let go of the possibility. My daughter, I will call her Caroline, drove up from Charlotte in December. She came for the holidays, but she also came because she had been worrying about me over the phone and wanted to see for herself. Caroline was 38, a physical therapist with a practical mind and a habit of watching people carefully before she spoke. She was like her mother in that way. Margaret had been able to read a room faster than anyone I ever knew, and Caroline had inherited that quality, along with her mother's dark eyes and her mother's patience with difficult people. Caroline watched Daniel for 3 days before she said anything to me. She came to my room on the third morning, closed the door quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed the way she used to do when she was a teenager and had something serious to say. She asked me how long I had been feeling unwell. I told her about 4 months. She asked what had changed around that time. I thought about it and told her about Daniel moving in, the new routine, the adjustment of having another person in the house. She asked about the glasses. I was surprised by the question. I told her about them, the box, the dinner table, Daniel's explanation. She asked if she could look at them. I told her they were on the coffee table downstairs. She said she would look at them later and asked me not to mention it to Daniel. She left the next morning. She hugged me longer than usual at the door. She called me that evening from Charlotte. She spoke carefully. She said she had been reading about something called dermal absorption toxicity, and that she did not want to alarm me, but that she wanted me to stop wearing the glasses until she had a chance to look into something. She said that certain compounds, particularly some heavy metal salts, could be suspended in materials that made prolonged contact with skin, and that they could cause exactly the kind of slow, diffuse symptoms I had been describing. Joint pain, fatigue, loss of appetite, cognitive fog. I sat down at the kitchen table while she spoke. She said she had looked closely at the nose pads and the earpieces of the glasses before she left, and that there was a texture to the coating on the inner surfaces that she did not think was standard. She said she had taken photographs with her phone, and that she was going to send them to a colleague of hers, a physician who specialized in occupational and environmental medicine. I asked her what she was saying. She said she was saying she was not sure. She was saying she hoped she was wrong. She was saying, please do not wear the glasses, and please do not tell Daniel that she had asked me to stop. I put the glasses in a kitchen drawer and did not mention them. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. I continued going through the motions of my days, my morning walks, my meals, my evenings watching the news, while carrying the knowledge that something might be very wrong and that the person most likely responsible was sleeping in my guest room. I watched Daniel the way you watch something you are no longer sure of. I looked for the signs I might have missed. I found them, or thought I found them, scattered through the preceding months like breadcrumbs I had been too trusting to follow. The way he had asked about the glasses almost daily, the way his concern for my health seemed to intensify as my health worsened. The way he had, around Thanksgiving, gently raised the subject of my will, asking whether it was up to date, whether I had thought about estate planning, framing it as financial responsibility and nothing more. The way he had, twice, referred to the house as eventually becoming his. Both times I had let the phrasing pass without challenge. Now I heard it differently. I also thought about money. Daniel had arrived with 2 suitcases and debt I had only partially understood the scale of. He was charming and unemployed and living under a roof that was worth, in the current Asheville market, close to $900,000. I thought about that number. I thought about what it would buy a 34-year-old man who had failed at everything else he had tried. I did not sleep well. Caroline called again in early January. Her colleague had looked at her photographs and had agreed that the coating on the inner surfaces of the glasses appeared unusual. He could not make a determination from photographs. He told her that if there was real concern, the glasses needed to go to a laboratory. She had already mailed them to a toxicology testing service in Research Triangle Park. She had paid for expedited processing out of her own money. She told me the results would take approximately 10 days. I thanked her and put down the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time in the dark. On a Thursday morning in the second week of January, I drove to pick up a prescription at the pharmacy where I had been a customer for 11 years. The pharmacist's name was Gerald. He was a quiet, precise man in his late 50s, who had filled my prescriptions to my wife's illness and through my own various minor complaints over the years. We knew each other the way you know people in a small city when you have lived there long enough. Not intimately, but genuinely. I handed him my insurance card. He began processing the prescription. Then he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He asked me to come around to the consultation window. I did. He lowered his voice. He said he wanted to ask me something, and he hoped I would not be offended. He said he had noticed some changes in my appearance over the past several months. He had been observing them gradually, and had told himself it was none of his business, but that today something had made him decide to say something. He said my hair had thinned noticeably. He said the skin along my jawline and the backs of my hands had a particular quality that he had seen before in a patient many years ago when he had worked in a hospital toxicology unit before moving into retail pharmacy. He asked me if I had been in contact with any unusual chemicals. He asked if I had any new items that made prolonged skin contact. He asked if anyone close to me might have access to substances that shouldn't be in a home. I stood at that consultation window and felt the floor shift under me. Not physically, but in the way that the ground shifts when something you have been afraid to believe becomes something you can no longer avoid believing. I told him about the glasses. I told him about Caroline's concerns. I told him that the glasses were currently at a laboratory in Research Triangle Park. He nodded slowly. He said that what he was describing sounded consistent with chronic low-level exposure to an organometallic compound, a category that includes certain heavy metals that can be suspended in polymer coatings applied to surfaces that make regular contact with skin. He said the symptoms I had described over the preceding months fit that exposure pattern. He said I should see a physician that day and specifically request a heavy metals panel, which is not part of routine blood work. He wrote the name of the test on a small piece of paper and handed it to me through the window. He also said something that I have thought about many times since. He said that in his experience, this kind of exposure, gradual, sustained, delivered through an object given as a gift and encouraged to be worn daily, did not happen by accident. I drove home with the paper in my shirt pocket and my hands very steady on the wheel because I had made a decision. I was not going to confront Daniel that day. I was not going to call the police that day. I had no laboratory results. I had the concern of a pharmacist and the suspicion of my daughter and 4 months of feeling wrong, and I knew that none of that was enough. What I needed was evidence that could not be explained away, and I needed to get it before Daniel had any reason to think I was looking. I called Caroline that afternoon from my car, parked in the lot of a hardware store 3 miles from the house. I told her what Gerald had said. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she would call the laboratory and ask about the timeline. She called back 40 minutes later and said they had already completed preliminary analysis. She said she would drive up the following morning. She arrived at 8:30 with 2 coffees and a folder. She sat across from me at the kitchen table while Daniel was still asleep upstairs, and she laid out the preliminary report. The coating on the inner surfaces of the glasses contained a compound in the organolead family, a category of organometallic chemistry that has almost no legitimate consumer application and that is known to be absorbed through prolonged skin contact, causing exactly the progressive symptom pattern I had been experiencing. The concentration in the coating was not accidental. According to the laboratory notes, achieving that concentration in that specific application required deliberate preparation. Caroline had also that morning spoken to the colleague in occupational medicine. He had told her to contact the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office and to request that I receive a formal heavy metals panel through a physician before any confrontation took place, so that my own medical records would document the exposure independently of the laboratory findings. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's steadiness, and she was holding herself together with enormous effort. I reached across the table and held her hand for a moment. Then I asked her what she thought we should do about Daniel. She said she thought we needed to do it right. She said she did not want him to have any chance to disappear before there was a paper trail. She said she had already quietly texted Priya, Daniel's ex-wife, and that Priya had said, without prompting, that during the marriage she had sometimes found Daniel researching things on his laptop that he would quickly close when she entered the room, and that twice she had seen search terms related to toxicology before the screen went dark. She had not thought much of it at the time. She thought plenty of it now. We called the sheriff's department that afternoon. The officer who came to the house was professional and thorough. He reviewed the laboratory report and took our statements. He told us that this kind of case, what he called an environmental poisoning with documented preparation, was taken seriously, and that we should not confront Daniel directly. He coordinated with the district attorney's office over the next 2 days. On a Tuesday morning, 2 plainclothes officers came to the house while I was sitting in the kitchen. Daniel came downstairs at 9 o'clock in his usual unhurried way, poured himself coffee, and looked up to find 2 people he did not know sitting at his father's table. I watched his face in that moment. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the quick, practiced assessment of the situation, the search for the angle, the instinct to perform confusion or innocence. I had watched that face for 34 years, and I knew its machinery better than he realized. One of the officers introduced themselves. The other placed a copy of the laboratory report on the table. Daniel said nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said there had to be some mistake. Then he said he had ordered the glasses from a website and had no idea what was in them. Then he said he wanted a lawyer. He was arrested and transported that morning. I sat in my kitchen after they left and drank the rest of my coffee, which had gone cold, and I looked at the empty chair across from me. I thought about the October evening when he had arrived with 2 suitcases and a bottle of bourbon, and I had told myself it was a good sign. I thought about all the evenings after that when he had asked about the glasses with exactly the right amount of casual interest. I thought about the patience it must have required, the sustained, deliberate patience of a person who has decided that someone else's life is an obstacle to be managed. I do not have words for what that feels like when it is your child. I am not sure there are words for it. There is a particular grief that lives below anger and above numbness, and that is where I spent the next several weeks. My heavy metals panel came back positive for organoleate compounds at a level consistent with months of dermal exposure. My physician referred me to a specialist in environmental toxicology at Mission Hospital. The treatment process was slow and required chelation therapy and regular monitoring, but my physician told me that my prognosis was good because we had caught it before irreversible damage occurred. He told me that the pharmacist who had noticed the signs and spoken up had likely made a significant difference in that outcome. I went back to Gerald's pharmacy the following week and told him what had happened. He was a quiet man, and he received the information quietly. He said he was glad he had said something. He said he had almost not said something, that he had told himself 3 times over the preceding weeks that it was none of his business, that he was probably reading too much into what he was seeing. He said that the 4th time he told himself that, he had decided he could not live with the possibility of being wrong about doing nothing. I thanked him in the only way I knew how, which was inadequately. Some things cannot be repaid. Caroline drove up from Charlotte every other weekend through February and March. She sat with me through the difficult evenings and cooked meals and watched old movies on the television in the living room without needing to fill the silence. I had raised her largely alone after Margaret died, and she had become, in the years since, one of the most decent people I knew. I told her that during one of those evenings. She told me to stop being sentimental. We both laughed in a way that felt like something healing, slowly, the way bone heals after a break, not back to the original shape exactly, but solid in a new way. Daniel was charged with first-degree attempted poisoning and 1 count of elder abuse under North Carolina statute. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case went forward. I will not describe the legal proceedings in detail because they were long and because I have told enough of this story already. What I will tell you is what I told the victim impact statement process, which I am allowed to share. I said that the injury was not only physical. I said that the deeper injury was the revision, the way that Daniel's actions forced me to go back through 34 years of memory and reread everything. Every moment of his charm, every explanation for a failure. Every time he had looked at me with what I believed was love, and I now could not help wondering whether it had been something else. That revision is a long and painful project. I am still engaged in it. I also said this. The people who saved my life were a daughter who trusted her instincts and acted on them quietly and carefully, and a pharmacist who almost stayed silent and chose not to. Neither of them made a dramatic gesture. Neither of them confronted anyone or declared anything loudly. They just paid attention, and they took what they noticed seriously, and they did the next right thing with the information they had. I've thought about that a great deal in the months since. I still live in the house in Asheville. I still walk the creek trail in the mornings, though I am slower than I was, and the cold bothers my joints more than it used to. My hair has grown back. My appetite has returned. Food has flavor again, which is a smaller joy than you might expect, and also a larger one. My doctor tells me that I should expect a full recovery, which is a phrase that means different things in different contexts. Physically, I understand what it means. In the other ways, I am learning what it means as I go. I do not wear glasses. I probably never will again. If there is something in your life that you are wearing because someone you love gave it to you and asked you to keep it on, and if you have been feeling wrong in ways you cannot explain, I want you to hear this from someone who learned it the hard way. Trust the feeling. Go to your doctor and tell them specifically what you want tested. Let the people who love you quietly do the things they do quietly. And if someone behind a pharmacy counter looks at you the way Gerald looked at me, if they take a breath and decide not to mind their own business, let them talk. It matters. More than you know. It mattered to me. I am still here because it mattered.